Hi, I'm Audible editor Kat Johnson, and I'm thrilled to be here with Chelsea G. Summers. She is the author of the new Audible original, A Certain Hunger, which follows a food writer named Dorothy Daniels, who's on a self-actualizing journey of homicide and cannibalism. We're going to unpack that a little bit, but I'm thrilled to welcome Chelsea here today. Thanks for being here.
I'm so happy to be here.
Chelsea, your novel was first described to me as Eat, Pray, Love meets American Psycho, and this does not disappoint. It is. Tell me a little bit about how this idea came about and what your process was like.
So I came back from Italy in 2011 and I was heartbroken. And a friend before I had left for Italy had suggested, why don't you write the new Eat, Pray, Love. And I kind of flipped it into Love, Pray, Eat, and then spelled it P-R-E-Y. And I thought, yeah, sure, the first Chick-Lit-Cannibalism-Novel. And then I was like, actually, that sounds amazing, and I want to read this book. And I was heartbroken. My friend Caitlin Foisey gave me a tarot card reading that sort of spurred me into the first impetus to write the first couple of chapters. And I didn't finish it until 2014 when, again, heartbroken and extremely angry, I used my spite for good, not evil.
Well, let's talk about the spite element a little bit. So this writer in the novel she's kind of eviscerating the men.
Not kind of. She literally eviscerates the men in her life. Yeah.
She does. And how did you think of this sort of idea that sort of food and sex and death were all going to be wrapped up in this way?
Right. Well, one of the things that has always been difficult for me about relationships ending is you're so close with somebody, you're so intimate with them, they're so much a part of your life, and then all of a sudden they're gone. And how do you cope with the feelings that are left over? How do you deal with that sense of loss? And so I kind of took that idea of like, okay, we have relationships that are over, but we don't want to lose it entirely. So she eats the men in order to keep her with her. It's a method of like maintaining that relationship by making them part of her, literally.
Wow. And it is thrilling to listen to. Speaking of the listening element, this being Audible, this is an Audible original, so it was written specifically for audio. How did that affect your writing process, if it did at all?
Right. The character is very self-involved, and she doesn't have a lot of time or interest in other people's feelings, which made it much easier to have a first-person point of view that doesn't flip over to a lot of dialogue or require a lot of other people kind of making noise in her own head. So I think that the story organically lent itself to audio from the very beginning.
I agree. I feel like, and sometimes for me, literary fiction can be tricky in audio, and I felt like this one really, really worked because you're so in Dorothy's head. And also, we have to talk about the narration. It's narrated by Hilary Huber, who's done great work with thrillers and fiction as well. And how much did you have to do with the sort of process of selecting her and directing her?
Not a lot. Andrew, my Audible editor, came to me with a couple of names, and I really liked Hilary's because she has a slightly older, sexier voice, and it was really important to me to have a voice that sounded like it was lived in. And also she speaks Italian, and there's a fair amount of Italian in the book. So her ease with the second language was really important. The fact that she's done a lot of erotica was really nice. And she emailed me and she was like, do you have any suggestions? And I was like, just strap yourself into a cunt jumpsuit and have fun.
Well, she did.
She did.
And it comes through. And actually, for me, one of the pleasures, because I read your manuscript early on, and then now I've listened, and there's so much great humor in there. And I think especially for a dark story like this, it really helps to have that humor come through. And I feel like she really sort of nails some of those great lines that you have.
Had I merely learned to enjoy the act of killing? The television shows and the movies all say that. You kill a person or two, and you get a taste for it, as if murder were caviar or fugu, sophisticated gastronomical experiences whose enjoyment requires inculcation into a cult. Or as if killing were like potato chips. One leads to another in an endless orgy of mindless indulgence. Before you know it, the whole bag is gone, and you're sitting there with gritty fingers, grease on your lips, and bathed in blood.
I love that so much. The way that you mix food writing and these gruesome, grisly scenes is truly something to behold.
Thanks.
Clearly, you have a background in food writing.
I do, yeah. I write about wine for a living.
Okay. Did you sort of take some delight in getting us, because there were moments when I actually got hungry with some of your food descriptions.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love food writing because when it's done really well, it's a transcendent, beautiful thing. Like I love MFK Fisher and I love Anthony Bourdain. And when you read their writing, it really encapsulates this physical moment of inhabiting this memoiristic experience in ways that other kinds of writing really don't. Like there are things that it's kind of like Proust's Madeleine. Like there are these things, whether it's, you're a little kid eating one of those little boxes of cereal in front of a television on Saturday morning when your parents are in bed, or whether it's like, a ridiculous meal that you've had in Italy that you will somehow take with you forever, like listening to a piece of music that you heard repeatedly during a very short but intense period of your life, manages to evoke a range of emotional and physical experiences. So it was really important to me to use the same kind of idea of again, like a Proust's Madeleine.
Yeah. Well, it's not always done well, and I mean, it's writing about food or writing about sex, like the very primal, not always done well. But I think
they use different parts of your brain. So, like when you are having sex or when you're eating, there's one part of your brain, and when you're writing, it's another part of your brain. And often those two things don't really hold hands. And when it comes to sex, they're really not supposed to. You're not supposed to be able to remember it and narrate it in the same way. So it's a way of translating one part of your brain to another and having them hold hands and sing.
That's so interesting. And I want to talk a little bit too about the process of writing this, because I know this, I read a piece you wrote on Medium. This was kind of a long process for you.
Yeah, it took about 7 years.
Yeah, and this is your first novel.
It's my very first novel, yeah.
And can you tell us a little about your arc from?
Sure. So I started writing it, it was actually October of 2011, so just about 8 years ago today, ish. I was in Italy. I was living in this 17th century villa. It was freezing cold and I was miserable. And I was still getting over this really just terrible relationship with this Italian man. And I wrote the scene where this Italian dude gets eviscerated.
Oh, yeah.
And that's and it's Dorothy's first murder. And after that, it took me a really long time to return to it. And it wasn't until 2014 when I just had the feeling like it's now or never. It's just time to finish it. And so I spent about 8 months writing on my nights off and my weekends off. And I took 2 weeks off from work and I just pushed it out. And then it took another couple of years to revise it and find an agent and send it out in the world.
Wow. And when I've described it to people, it sounds like it could be a thriller, it could be horror. It's definitely not that. We talked before about, for me, it almost reminds me of Lolita, because you've taken this very taboo subject and you've described it in this really sort of gorgeous prose. Did you ever play around with the genre at all, or did you always know?
I didn't know. I think that there are two basic kinds of fiction writers, and there are discovery writers who aren't really sure what it's going to be. You just sort of see things and you want to write these things down, and then you figure out what the whole shape of the book is going to be like. And then there are architects, so people who build the world and map it out and just make, go from the ground up into reality. For this book, I was very much a discovery writer, and at the end of it, I was like, so it's kind of a satire. Who knew?
Right.
I really didn't know that was what I was writing.
Right.
But yeah.
And you satirize also, I feel like, the media as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm publishing this as a almost 57-year-old writer, so it's my first book, and I was writing freelance for a long time, and I was really frustrated with the publishing industry, and I felt like, especially as an aging professional, that it was hard to carve my place in the world, and I took a lot of my anger and frustration out in this novel.
Right.
Yeah.
Very directly on some.
Very much.
Some
Yes,
numbers.
quite. Yes.
One of the great pleasures for me of listening to this novel was you delve into a lot of detail about sort of murder and food adjacent topics, like the history of kosher slaughterhouses and cannibalistic shrimp. How fun was it to do the research for this?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I found myself kind of repeatedly going into these deep dives of things. Like I was like, all of a sudden I was like, I know nothing about how cows are raised in Italy, so I've got to find that out. And it was really fascinating. And the more, especially the research that I did about the meat industry, the angrier I got, and the more important it was for me to have the character embrace my vexation about how we raise, slaughter, process, and buy meat. Right. And so the research, the book informed the research then informed the book.
Right, okay. And I'm referring to details as fun. I should note that for me, this novel is like such a joy, and people who kind of from the outside might not see it that way.
Yeah, I think that there's something very freeing for women in particular, in specific in this moment in time, to access feelings of rage and violence, and do it in a way that is pleasurable and safe for everyone. And it's an outlet that men have had for a very long time. I mean, I think one of the joys of going to a slasher film is, feeling the feels of the person doing the slashing. For women, we very rarely, with the exception of like Jennifer's Body or some of the more current fiction releases, have had an opportunity to identify with killers. So I really wanted to do that, mostly for myself, and it's really exciting that other people have enjoyed it too.
Yeah, and we're, both you and I are true crime fans, which we talked about, and I think that's an area where we see women kind of letting out this frustration and this sort of vicarious, perhaps, thrill.
Yeah.
What do you think about this sort of true crime movement and how it appeals to women?
I love true crime. I don't have that thing where, the stay sexy, don't get murdered. I don't have the idea of watching true crime and preparing myself for it, although I understand that that's one of the reasons why people are drawn to it. For me, it's always been about identifying with the people doing the violence. And also, I love stories that give us insight into the victims, because so much of the time, particularly when you're talking about like, Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy, right? I was thinking Danson.
I love
I'm
that
like,
you forgot his
not,
name. We should
he is
forget
not
his
a
name.
murderer, as far as we know. That you always hear about the men, but you don't really hear a lot about the women who, or other men who are like who were the victims. So it's both hearing, it's flipping the script. So it's not about male violence, and it's about understanding other sides of the equation.
Right, and I think we're seeing that people are really wanting to hear more victim stories and be exposed to those.
Yeah, but I also think like there's a lot of there's a lot about our culture that tells women that we're not allowed to feel a full range of emotions.
Right.
And we're not allowed to, be angry because then we're scary. And it's like, well, what's wrong with being angry and scary?
Right.
It's a human reality.
I mean, yeah, the book is incredible, and it's really special to listen to.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to know that it's resonating with other people, because when I was writing the book, I was like, oh, it's my beautiful little gory baby crawling across the floor, leaving a trail of blood, and I love it, and I just want to show it to the world and have other people love it too. But, I worried that they wouldn't, so it's really nice to know that it's resonating.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm 100% the sort of market for it, but it is definitely not all, sort of gore and darkness. There is actually a really wonderful female friendship in the novel.
Yeah, there is, and my friends are massively important to me. Emma Absinthe, who's the best friend, is mostly inspired by my friend Molly Crabapple, who's an artist and a writer, and she did the cover for the book, and
which is amazing.
Yeah, the cover is insanely good.
It's so good.
So good.
I will be wearing
happy.
that tote bag all around town.
Yeah.
So.
So it's about a relationship between two women who are very reluctant friends and grow closer over the years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's not all doom and gloom for Dorothy, and she almost gets a happy ending. I don't want to spoil anything, but it does end on
No spoilers.
No spoilers
No
for
spoilers.
yeah. Well, no spoilers, but I'm so excited about it. I can't wait for people to hear it. And do you have anything else going on upcoming you can share?
I am working on a novel that is historical in that it takes place in the 17th century. There are actual, real, live, or no longer live, they're dead now, living people, historical people who are in the novel, but it's about a castrato from Napoli, Italy, and a witch who lives on the coast of Norway.
Oh, wow. This sounds like more dark research for you to dive into.
Definitely.
And I will be there for it.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah.
And you can listen to Chelsea's Audible original, A Certain Hunger, only available on Audible.